Posted by you/Yugathelizi. What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? There have been several confirmed cases in a few different countries of people living in other people's houses unbeknownst to them. I believe one case went on for a couple of years. The intruder would wait until the homeowner would go to work and then sneak out and steal small amounts of food as not to be noticed. Well, eventually the homeowner did notice and couldn't figure out where his food was going, so he set up a hidden camera to record it. I can only imagine how scary it would have been to come home from work one night and sit down to watch the video. Skipping through hours of stillness, to suddenly come across a person crawling out of your attic. And then the slow realization that that person is still in your house at that moment. And then the retroactive fear of thinking back to all the times you laid awake at night and heard a noise, which you just dismissed as coming from the pipes or the old wooden beams, but actually it was a fucking person just above you. It gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I think about it. I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friend told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bed rolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened, and afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. One day as a kid I was exploring the forest near our house with my cousin. The forest was on a hill, but there were several craters there because of bombs that were dropped there during the World Wars, Germany. One day we saw a backpack at the bottom of one. We tried to climb down, but it was kinda steep and slippery, so we didn't want to risk falling. We planned on returning later with a rope, and went home. The next day news story was that there was a backpack found with the remains of a girl, in that forest. A guy walking his dog found it, after the dog wouldn't stop barking and going crazy at the edge of the crater, while staring at the backpack. We stopped exploring the forests after. Lived W3 other girls sophomore year of college. All three took off early for spring break, leaving me alone in the house. First night alone, I heard someone bang on my front door at 2 a.m. Then I hear more knocks at the back door. A man yells "Boulder police, open the door." When I didn't, I heard body slams against both doors. Soon I hear "Little girl, open the door, we know you're alone." At this point I'm so scared I keep accidentally dialing 611 instead of 911. When I eventually do get the police, cars roll up, thankfully, just minutes later. Officers have 4 boys from our school hockey team face down on the grass. I had to file restraining orders against them and the kicker, one lived across the street from me and we'd never spoken a single word before then. When I worked in healthcare I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics, people. It happened about 12 years ago. I'm a 39 years old anesthetist from Egypt. 12 years ago I was working in a small hospital in the rural city of Rosetta. If you know Rosetta Stone, this is the city where they found it. The hospital is formed of 5 floors. The dormitories are in the 5th floor. The ground floor had the emergency and causality department. Other floors have the wards, the labs and the operative theater. At that time the hospital was under some maintenance. In that particular day I was on duty. There was nothing in the operative theater that afternoon, so I was in my room in the 5th floor surfing the web on my netbook. I heard some knocks on the door. It was the janitor. He told me that some new beds and wardrobes would be delivered now. He asked me to stay out of my room till they finished the replacement. I stayed in the TV room for a while when suddenly the PA system announced my name to head immediately to ER. Before I moved, one security man came running and he told me that there was a big road traffic accident that involved a school bus and that everyone available is needed down. I rushed to my room, found the new furniture in place, so I closed it and ran down to the ER. When I entered the ER department, I noticed the new color of the walls. Before it was green, now it's blue with silver decorations everywhere. While I was helping the children, I asked one nurse when they changed the colors of the ER, would all the hospital have the same pattern? She looked me confused and asked what new color. It was always like that. I got confused myself, but I didn't pay attention to that. There were many injured children. Theirs were many doctors, pediatricians, surgeons, etc. A lot of them were new faces to me. I was working in this place for several years, so I almost knew everyone. I was asking myself when all those new people came. I should be more social and so, but I didn't expect anything bad. I was asking the people I know about the new doctors, and always I was getting the same answers. You don't know him? How? He was here for several years. We meet over lunch or dinner, etc. Again, I was confused, but I didn't pay attention. Thank God nothing was serious. No one was admitted to ICU or went through an emergency surgery. A couple of hours later, everything is fine and things began to settle down. So I went outside the ER to have some fresh air. I won't forget what I saw. The hospital place is near the Nile, the Western branch, the Rosetta branch, so that's what I usually see when I leave the hospital. But what I saw was simply the Mediterranean. Rosetta City is near the Mediterranean, but not that close. I couldn't believe my eyes. I began to look to the surrounding buildings. Some I knew, some I didn't. Now I freaked out. I remembered that I didn't recognize the ER or the new doctors. I ran inside to my colleagues and I asked them about what is outside. They told me it's the Mediterranean. I shouted, I know it's, but how did it come to here? Everyone was confused. I kept asking, where am I? And my colleagues started to calm me down and try to understand why the panic. I tried to call my parents. I was single at that time, using my cell phone, but they didn't answer. I wanted to call another older anesthetist. I consider him a father and my best friend. I couldn't find his name on my phone. I really freaked out. I asked my colleagues for his phone number. Everyone told me that they don't recognize the name. I was sure that I wasn't dreaming. I was treating children, calculating drug doses. My mind was clear enough to know that I wasn't dreaming. I got a mental block. I didn't know what to do. Then I decided that I will leave the hospital at once. I need to see my family. I ran to the 5th floor to my room to change my clothes and get my things before I leave the place. Once I opened the room, I noticed the usual furniture. No new furniture, no new bed or wardrobe. I stood there for a moment totally lost. Then I heard someone calling me. It was a security guard. He told me that there is a big accident down that involved a lot of children and they needed everyone down there. I kept staring at him without any response. He kept talking that PA is down because of a faulty maintenance and that's why they are calling the doctors individually. I told him that I will go down. He asked me if there is any other doctors in the dormitory. I told him that I don't know, so he went to check. I had a look outside the window and here it was the Nile and the usual scene. But I was already lost. I went down to help, the same children, same injuries, but I was completely lost, confused and in hands shaking. My legs barely carried me. It was easy to manage the children since I knew them already. I knew what kind of injuries we will find. My colleagues, usual daily group, no more new doctors, asked if I was okay and that I was pale. The next few days was like hell to me. I had nightmares. I wasn't able to think clearly during my day. Then I took 1 week off to calm down. I have never experienced anything similar. I wasn't on any medications at that time or under any kind of stress. Everything was clear, it wasn't a dream at all. As I said, my mind was clear to pay attention to the details of drug doses, scoring of injuries. I'm sure. Till today I still remember the children and what I did to them. I only told this story to this older anesthetist and later to my wife because whenever I remember it, I remember that horrible feelings I had. The Reina Marroquin story. A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s, got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss's wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. When I was about 8 years old, our school was doing swimming lessons as part of the curriculum. My mom worked late, so we went to after-school care and didn't get home until after dark. When we got home, Mom asked me to take my wet togs, bathing suit, and towel out to the clothesline to dry so I could use them the next day. I was so confident going outside to do this and had this real feeling of being a big kid. I walked into our backyard only for a man to be running at me. I screamed, jumped inside and instinctively locked the back door as I did so. As this was happening, my mom told me she heard the guy jump the gate which was next to her bedroom just after she heard me scream and came running to find me. I slept with the light on until I was 16 and I get my husband to go outside for me while it's dark. One of my friends was drugged by a nice-seeming girl at a bar that tried to sex traffic her. The girl got her an Uber to an address she didn't know under the guise of get my drunk friend home, but she woke up on the way and told the driver she didn't know where they were going. They called the cops. Apparently that wasn't the first time that week they'd heard the same story and they recognized the address as one they were already tracking. If she hadn't woken up on the way she might have been trafficked by now. Apparently they use younger, safe-seeming girls to do the collecting a lot of the time. One of my dad's friend's wife was murdered by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk, so he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. He was stopped by a police officer and wasn't allowed any closer until he saw that it was his wife. The Lake Bodom murders are very scary. There are 4 teens who go on a camping trip in Finland. The next morning, 3 of the teens are found murdered, and one of them is almost dead and severely injured, but survived. No one knows who the murderer is today. 44 years later, the 4th teen, Nils, who survived, was accused of murdering them and gets sent to prison. But then he was released a year later, because there was little DNA evidence to prove this. And no good evidence to prove that he murdered them at all. However, there is circumstantial evidence such as he allegedly fought his one friend due to an argument and was drunk. Some say this could have ended in accidental and/or intentional murder. However, I personally highly doubt that Nils is guilty. I couldn't find much information on who Nils thought the murderer was. So my thoughts are 1, it's too traumatic for him to remember, or 2, he didn't recognize the person. Some other key suspects include the manager of the camp, who was known for being quite hostile, an ice cream vendor who admitted to the crime on his deathbed, and a man who lived only a short distance from the camp who claimed to be in Germany during that time. However, there is much doubt for his claim. There was a sketch released of the alleged murderer, who seems to be an unsettling picture of an older man. And you can find a photo of the man, who looks like the guy in the sketch, attending a police speech. Coworker's dad was babysitting his baby boy for him. At one point, Granddad went into the nursery to check on the baby and found that he'd somehow reached for the window blind strap and tangled himself up in it to the point where he was choking. Baby was already blue and all of the veins in his face had popped. Grandpa frantically dialed 911. EMS was there in 2 to 3 minutes and they brought the little fella back to life and he's okay now. Edit, wow, you guys really blew this up overnight for me. For the parents here freaking out, really, check to see how close to the crib any hanging cords like this are. When they brought the little guy to the hospital, they separated and questioned the parents and grandpa over and over like they were suspected of doing this on purpose. Of course, it got sorted out as a true accident. The child is now in his 20s and all is well with him. I'm a crime writer and once interviewed a woman who told me an unrelated horror story about something that happened to her as a girl. When she was like 10, she had trouble sleeping and imagined the boogeyman was living in her closet, staring at her during the night. Every night she would come down and tell her parents, and every night her father would tell her the boogeyman didn't exist and she should go back to bed. Well, this happened for several nights and the father got tired of it. So that night he walked her back to her bedroom, turned on the light, and said, "I'll show you there's no boogeyman," and went to open the closet door. But something on the other side held it shut. He sent his daughter out of the room and forced the door open to find that a man was inside. He'd been sneaking into their house every night to stand in the girl's closet and watch her, and maybe more. He beat the ever-loving shit out of the man and the man went to prison. When I interviewed this woman I looked him up online. He'd recently gotten out on parole and had skipped out on his weekly checks. There was a warrant out for his arrest and nobody knew where he was anymore. When I was a little girl, 9 years old or thereabouts, I was playing at the school down the street from my house. It was the middle of summer and myself and a girlfriend were hanging around watching the boys play street hockey. One of the boys called my name and said a man in the parking lot was looking for me. The parking lot was mostly obscured by the building, but I could see an old 70s style van that hadn't been there earlier. I was walking over to the van when the mother of one of the other kids showed up looking for her son and asked me what I was doing. When I told her someone in the van was looking for me, she took my hand and started to walk with me and the van pulled out and sped away. Friend's mom walked me home and I wasn't allowed out of my yard without my parents for the rest of the summer. I was so upset and didn't understand why I was being punished. It was only years later that I understood that I was likely being targeted by some opportunistic scumbag for who knows what. Thanks, Mrs. Gibson, wherever you are. My mom was stalked by a guy in her chemistry class. This was back in the late 70s, during her first semester at college. They were lab partners, and Mom thought he seemed cute and nice, and was too shy at the time to ask him out, but she said if he'd asked her out, she would have went. They were friendly with each other in class, but their paths didn't cross outside of that since they were in different majors. As the semester wore on, however, she noticed he was often waiting for her outside of her other classes, the library, the student union, out in front where her dad picked her up and dropped her off. This continued into the spring semester. Puzzled, but not yet alarmed, she asked him how he always seemed to know where she was. He proudly said, "Oh, I asked the registrar's office for a copy of your schedule. My mom went to complain to the secretary who gave out her schedule, and the secretary blew it off because you guys are dating." Luckily, Mom had already arranged to transfer to a different school for sophomore year, and spent the remaining time left avoiding him. She never saw him after that. But it wasn't over. Flash forward to grad school. Mom was at work, and Grandma gets a knock on the door. Since the man at the door was in a naval uniform, and my grandmother was a Navy nurse, she let the man in, because he looked rather sad. He starts off by saying how sorry he is for my mother's loss, which completely mystified Grandma. "Well, ma'am, I just got back from overseas, and I found out my friend recently killed himself." He spoke so highly of his fiancée, your daughter, and I wanted to meet her. My grandmother told him her daughter didn't even have a boyfriend at the moment, let alone a fiancé. It doesn't take too long to establish the man's deceased friend in question was in fact Mom's stalker. The naval lieutenant was pretty upset, and my grandmother even more so. She made him leave before Mom got home. The weird thing about the stalker's death is that it was ruled a suicide, but he hanged himself from a very high up tree branch you'd need a ladder to get to, and his hands were tied behind his back. From what my mother later learned, he had a tendency to snoop and generally stick his nose in places they didn't belong besides the obvious stalking thing, and this didn't win him too many friends, so it's anyone's guess who he might have pissed off. My mom always concludes this story kind of nonchalantly, like, yeah, back in those days, they didn't really know much about stalking. They've gotten a little better in terms of awareness now. It gives me the creeps to think what could have happened if he escalated his attempts to follow her after she left that school. Not the scariest one I've heard, but one of the scariest things to happen to me a few years ago. I was living in a big city, didn't know anyone. A guy I was seeing came, from abroad, to visit me. At the end of his trip I accompanied him to his train home. After that I went back into the metro to go home. It was about 2 p.m., very bright and sunny outside. I sat down on a bench near a man. We made eye contact and I said hello, he said hello back. I felt like something was off but tried to ignore it. The metro car came and we both got inside. It was crowded. I took a seat, he took one of the only available ones which was right across from me. I started thinking I was overreacting since he started talking to a man near me, seemed like they knew each other. His friend got off after a few stops but he stayed. Once I saw my own stop approaching to change lines I got up. He got up too and was right behind me. I could see his reflection in the metro car window and he was very slowly looking my legs up and down. I started to feel very uneasy. The doors open, we get off. I start walking quickly to the end of the platform then realize he might be following me. There were several entrances/exits around so I suddenly changed direction to go to another exit. He changed course as well. Then I turned around again, he followed. I did this a few times and he changed his path to match mine each time. Fuck. Eventually I knew I had to leave somehow so he wouldn't catch up, so I went to the exit I needed to take to change lines and go home. Unfortunately the passageway to the next line was flooded with people so I was slowed down. He caught up with me and started crowding me in, getting closer and closer to me. I was backed up against a wall at this point, him just smiling brightly at me. I don't know if this will seem that scary to y'all, but one time when I was about 16 I was at a laundromat with a friend in her neighborhood. I wasn't as familiar with the neighborhood, I was just there to hang out with her. We start walking inside and there's this man standing outside his car, seemingly looking for something. He was a bit older. My friend walked right past them without giving them a single glance, but he caught me looking and asked, "Will you come help me find my phone? I dropped it down here somewhere and I can't find it." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I looked into the car and noticed a second man in the car staring dead at me. I'll never forget the way he looked at me. I immediately snapped my head away and followed my friend inside. When we got inside, She told me that those men were known traffickers and that was one of their ploys. I was shaken up because if I had been a little younger and a little dumber, I don't know if I would have seen the second man in the car. I think I might have helped the old man. My friends and I were drinking one night and going around asking, hey, whatever happened to? In this case, a guy a few of us used to have an aid period with in high school. Nice kid. Googled him, I found a few sad results playing this game in the past, and there were a couple appellate court decisions visible in first few results. Turns out he went to Afghanistan, got extremely fucked up in combat, court notes said he saw things there that completely undid him, basically, and came home with PTSD and delusional schizophrenia. Once home, he apparently has been on a mission to kill his mother to save her from demons and send her to heaven. He's tried and failed numerous times, apparently. It's not just that a greater than B plot though. It's all the surround. We looked up his social media accounts then and it's just threads and threads of manic rambling about demons. It was sad to find this, and not the only time I've found a former classmate lost his/her mind, unfortunately, but also terrifying to think you could be normal, then through one set of circumstances or another, become completely insane within a few years. I had the most likable stepfather at the time. Would treat me really well. We would rent movies and plenty of nice activities for a 10-year-old boy. Until he cheated on my pregnant mother and she broke up. He threatened her, but from what I recall she didn't took it too seriously. He waited for us one night hiding in our apartment. Luckily for me I had stayed at my grandmother's place to sleep. He tied her up, raped and killed her. The baby did not survive. During trial he said he would have killed me too. After years I got more details of fuck stuff he had done. Like being abusive mentally and physically. But I couldn't see it as a kid. Didn't have contact with him for 17 years. From what I heard he got out of prison a couple of months ago. I have no idea if he still want me dead or not. I want to move out to somewhere else. I've been living in the same neighborhood all my life. But can't afford it right now. So I'm trying to be extremely careful and hoping for the best. When I was about 5, woke up to my house surrounded by loud voices and bright white lights. A group of robbers broke into our house after some kind of heist and were using us as hostages with rifles. The police had our house surrounded. My parents, grandparents, and I didn't really speak English back then, so my 12-year-old sister had to translate the demands to the police and instructions to us. My grandma told me to go back to sleep, which I somehow easily did.